welcome to the Real Estate Mogul MD podcast. Thanks for tuning in and taking control of your financial future. This is a show where we not only motivate and inspire, we give you actionable real-world experience to help you live life by design. You'll hear journeys and stories from other physicians, investors, coaches, consultants, and entrepreneurs. And now, here's your host, Brett Riggins. Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode here, Real Estate Mogul MD. This morning here, when we're recording this episode, I'm excited. I'm speaking with an orthopedic surgeon, founder and CEO of Easy Orthopedics. It's a direct specialty practice in orthopedics. And on top of that, what I've found very interesting is the recent writing, and how I came across Daniel Paull, MD, is on LinkedIn. And I'm very excited to dive into his writings, his opinions, and his journey as well. And we're going to touch into some real estate here on where he sees his career path going and how that partners with real estate. So without any further ado, Daniel Paull, MD, welcome to the show, man.
Hey, Brett. Thanks for having me on.
And you are a very humble man right out of the pack, because the package I get for how to introduce you, I don't think really puts you up on this billboard that you don't want to be on, but you've done quite a bit of writing here and expressing your opinion. First of all, I wanted to thank you for that, because so many people hold that back,
Yeah, well, I appreciate your support. I think that there's a lot of problems with our healthcare system, and there's a lot of things that need to be said, and a lot of people are afraid to say them, whether they're working with insurance companies and our hospitals, they're worried about getting punished. I don't have those things, so I'm not worried about it. So, I'm going to say what I believe to be true.
Very
and
interesting.
Just, keep doing that daily. I mean, that's what I try to do.
Yep. And how I was scrolling through a LinkedIn feed, and I'd come across a post that you had about real life physicians today, and it caught my eye. It was very interesting, because I speak with a lot of physicians, and I see this a lot on social media, is this idea of coping with life, and how we've come across this path where it's a machine, right? And as a physician, you're trading time for money. You're stuck in this machine and coping with it. And not only the stress of corporate coming in and holding these big machines, but I've also read in some of your articles as well too, this idea of cash versus insurance, and just the true burden of what insurance can do for you.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a complicated and at the same time not so complicated story. So, I mean, for the physician, it's a challenge to get into med school. It's a lot of work, and after that, it's residency, which is more work. And you kind of grind away with this sort of arrival fallacy, meaning that when I get out, it's going to be really good. And then you kind of keep that. You almost essentially have to keep that, because it gets you through these really tough times in medical school and residency. And if you do a fellowship, I mean, you're looking at sometimes close to 10 years of just being in the grind. And then when you get out, you find that things maybe weren't exactly as you thought they were going to be. I mean, it's very, very easy and encouraged, actually, to continue that grind. And, you don't really have the way practices are set up now. A lot of them are, large practices are owned by the hospitals, or you're looking at these large private equity groups, which is a terrible thing in my opinion. And you can't control your time and your hours in your life. So, I mean, they're kind of forced into this continued grind. And after a while of doing that, and this sort of realization, like, oh man, I'm been stuck in this forever, kind of like, well, what did I do? You get a lot of burnout and unhappiness and everything like that. So that is a common path for most physicians. I'd say more common than not. And so what I did is I started a practice where I essentially removed all the parasites that I believe are parasites from medicine, in the form of hospital systems, large administration, and insurance companies. So I operate a practice outside of that system where I don't take insurances. And that's really freed me up to practice medicine how I want to practice it, to have a lot of time that I can decide what to do with, and then also to be happy, honestly.
Yeah, there's so much there that I want to unpack, Daniel. And uh, typically I'll ask somebody to summarize, their journey in medicine. Like what made you want to become a physician, and then your journey leading up. Could you just, I hear your journey in some of the pain points already in that story. But what made you want to become a physician, and just summary of how your path to where you're at today?
Sure. So, I mean, you'll find this pretty standard among most orthopedic docs that they had some sort of injury sometime in their youth, and I'm no different. I had a bad skiing accident when I was 14, so I skied into a tree and I broke both my legs and my right arm. And I was pretty banged up. I missed a lot of eighth grade. But I went from being, essentially not able to walk to, running track a year later. And I said, well, this is pretty amazing. I think this is what I want to do. I come from a long line of engineers, so it just kind of made sense to me. I'm the only doctor in my family. So that decision was made at 14 years old for me. And you'll find that sometimes older, sometimes younger. The problem with making a decision like that in your youth is you don't really know what things look like. And you just kind of go for it. I mean, that's kind of how medicine is for the most part. So, college, medical school, residency. And I do like orthopedics. I really do. I really do. I'm not trying to say I don't like what I do. I really do. But, I didn't understand kind of the system that I was falling into, which who would at 14 years old? Plus, by the time you make that decision and by the time you get in there, a lot of time's passed, You're talking 15, 16 years, 17, longer, almost 20 years. So, I mean, there's a lot that can change in that time. So anyways, I finished my residency in general orthopedic surgery. Things were good. And then I've started a fellowship, which is an optional extra year you can do. And I did that in hand surgery. Well, I started it in hand surgery. And then halfway through, I sort of had two problems. And this is only a year program, right? I've already been through 4 years of medical school and 5 years of residency. One problem was that it was not a positive educational experience. You can kind of fill in the details there, but it was not a positive educational experience. So that was number one. Number two, I was looking for a job and I couldn't freaking find one. My wife's from Colorado and I've been dragging her all over the country at this point. And we're going to go back to Colorado and somewhere in Colorado, right? And I'm not super picky and it's like, I couldn't find one. Or if I found one, it was abusive at best. Take our entire call for our entire practice 24/7. Or, here's your 4-month guarantee. For those listening, the average is 2 years. So 2 years allows you theoretically to build a practice so that you can start, getting off your guaranteed money. But 4 months, I mean, it was these really terrible things. And it was this existential crisis, this unhappiness, and it kind of created this negative ball of energy, I like to say, and led to desperation, which caused me essentially just to quit my fellowship, which is not commonly done. If you're a fellowship, you're halfway through. I broke my lease. I said, lease be damned. And I moved out to Colorado and moved into my in-laws' basement to kind of start, figure out what I was going to do. And I had a friend who started a house call mobile practice down in Florida where I went to med school. And I'm like, man, this guy's happier than anybody I know. And he's doing better financially than anybody I know. I'm like, there's something here. So that was kind of the genesis of this kind of direct specialty care of orthopedics. No one had done it before that I know about for orthopedics. So I really had to pioneer and figure out a lot of it. And that was about 4 years ago now. So things have been going pretty well.
So when I hear that, Daniel, I hear that you started basically your own practice right out of the end of residency, right? So residency, fellowship, all of that. You started your own practice, your own company right out of the gate.
Yeah, I did. I mean, and a lot of it was desperation, I'm in it. I moved to Colorado Springs, where my wife's family is, and it's super saturated with orthopods. It's not like there's a bunch of jobs floating around. It just didn't seem like an option at that time to go in and get one of those jobs. So I had to be innovative and kind of create my own solution. So not only was it a new practice, it was a new model. So there's a lot of figuring out, as you can imagine. And there's a lot of kind of, funny stories in the beginning of me trying to do things and, okay, well, that didn't work. And, figuring it out. But the nuts and bolts of it are, you cannot take insurance. I do not interact with insurance companies. That keeps the overhead low. And I'm mobile, so that keeps the overhead really low. The employees are just me and my wife. And when I started, it was just me. I bounce around. I carry everything that I need. I go to different office spaces. I'll use other people's offices. They'll let me use it for free because I see their patients there. And then I'll do surgeries at a procedure room or surgery center. And there's a lot of other things I do, but that's kind of the nuts and bolts of it. There's a lot of people that, the thought is, well, if you're doing a cash pay practice, you're just seeing rich people all day. And that's really not the case. There are a lot of people who don't have insurance or whose deductible is high. And I'm actually the most economical option for them. And also not taking insurance just means that you don't have to interface with an insurance company. So you can practice as long as you don't interface with an insurance company, it's functional and it works.
Interesting. So this idea of need versus want, and my experience with that has been, if I'm in a situation where I need something versus when I'm in a situation when I want something, it's two totally different things. But in this particular scenario, Daniel, it sounded like that need scenario allowed you to be creative. And typically when we're in a survival mode, we don't have, we have a less, we're less likely to be creative in survival mode. But in this particular instance, you saw the opportunity and you filled this with your new practice.
Yeah, I think sometimes roadblocks can actually make you be more creative because you're forced to work around constraints. Yeah. And so it was just a lot of problem solving just from the outset. I mean, I really didn't have much else of a choice. I mean, it was kind of this or bust. I mean, a lot of people say, well, you can always get a job somewhere else. But yet I'm in a super saturated market with orthopods, and like those opportunities were not available. Yeah. So yeah, it's kind of like I just had to do it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I hear this a lot. So what I love about this show and my relationship with this show is I'm on the outside looking in. And when I see this, I hear certain things. I hear them across the platforms, Daniel. And just because it's medicine doesn't really make it different than other industries. And when I'm hearing you talk about, seeing this other gentleman and in Florida, you referenced him and how he's happy, which is a very unique thing in itself. And he's making money. So just like in other industries, we sit back and we look at, all right, what's he doing? How can I do that? I don't want to be in the grind. How can I do that and be just as happy? Right?
Yeah. I mean, I think it was a great example. So, I mean, I just kind of went for it. But yeah, physicians, you're dealing with an extremely conservative group of people who are extremely risk averse, who are also very uncreative, generally speaking. And that's not their fault. The reason why we're risk averse and we're not creative is because that's what gets smushed out of us during residency. So in residency, you have zero leverage at all times, essentially.
Yeah.
You are not allowed to be creative at all. So, I mean, if you come up with a new solution to a terrible systems problem, you will get beaten down. They will tell you, this is the way we've always done it. And it's not only, you just get in trouble for doing that sort of stuff. So a lot of people in residency, I mean, I got in trouble a lot as an intern. And then I didn't for the next 4 years because I realized I just have to keep all this for myself. You just have to accept these terrible system processes and just live with them. So by the time you get out, I mean, you've been in that for a while, and you lose your ability to really take risk and be creative. And I think that hinders a lot of physicians from really doing anything differently. They'll be the first people to naysay and tell you that anything won't work. So what I found with sort of creative projects like these is I just don't tell people about it until it's working, because it's easy for someone to tell you that it's not going to work. It's much harder for them to tell you that it's not going to work when it's working, which bizarrely I still get sometimes. I don't even know how to explain it. Well, that won't work. I'm like, well, it is working. Like, what do you want? Yeah. I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah.
But they'll always say something, right? They'll tell you that it will never work. And then when they'll tell you, and then after it's working, they'll say, well, you could be doing better if you did something else. And then when you're doing better than everybody else, they'll tell you, well, you're doing a disservice in some sort of way to somebody, So those people are always out there. I think they're best ignored, to be honest.
Yeah. Yeah. So I spoke with Arlen Myers, actually had him on. He is he leads a group called Society of Physician Entrepreneurs. It's called SOPE, SOPE. Very interesting. And this conversation about the education and how we are conditioning physicians along the way to fit the system. And what you said about being risk adverse, because you're not gambling with people's lives or people's health, right? So we're conditioning physicians to do this. And in doing so, you're squashing the creativity. So just like you say, this is something that's happening in the educational career, in the internships, in the residency, right? To fit this and to be safe. But it creates a scenario that limits change. It limits what I think makes us human, this ability to improvise, adapt, and overcome and create better solutions along the way.
Yeah. And I mean, just to give you an example, because sometimes stories are better than, than facts. Well, stories are facts in some sense, but I'll just give an example of what I'm talking about. So I was in some part of training. I was in the middle of my training, and it was pediatric orthopedics. And part of that was getting a consent form to do surgery on a child, which obviously is very, very necessary.
Yep.
So sometimes the parents were separated. So you have to get consent from both of them. Like, fine, right? Very reasonable, right? But the way they had you to do it was you'd have to handwrite a consent. And then for the other parent, you'd have to hand copy that. So have 2 copies. And like, even if the other parent was over the phone, like there was a checkbox on the same form where you could just check the other parent's name, but you had to hand copy and do a whole another form. Even if you talked to both of them and they both gave consent. So I complained about that a little bit, right? I'm in the middle of my residency now, so I'm not doing this as much anymore. And like, you just get harassed for it. You get written up. People say, oh, he's grumbling about all the paperwork. He doesn't want to work. And this is obviously one of the dumbest systems that I've seen, on a small scale. And like, you're not even allowed to be like, hey, this is so ridiculous. Why the heck do we do this? And they'll attack you. You get attacked for that. So, I mean, you get smushed into a little cot and you come out this perfectly shaped cot. And, you just accept these terrible, ridiculous things that you have to do, because fighting them is a losing battle almost every single time while you're inside the system.
Right.
Once you're outside the system, you can fight them all day, and you can actually make progress. I mean, so for me, I don't have a fax machine. I refuse to get one. So whenever it comes up where someone asks our fax number, I say, you can email it to us. Mm-hmm. It's more secure. And if they can't email it to us, well, you can snail mail it to us. You can pay the postage and print it out and send it.
Right.
If you can't do that, it must not be important.
Yeah. Whenever so I come from the construction world, and there are a few trades that just will not leave the fax machine. Like it's like the construction or the concrete guys. There's a few trades that are like, send in fax. I'm like, I can smoke signal you, but I will not fax. I will not fax you. It's very interesting how we hang on to that. In this journey too, I know. It's so difficult. And you said it before, Daniel, it is complicated. There's micro perspective, there's macro perspective. And when you're dealing with that macro piece, it's difficult, right? Because we do need these systems that allow us to learn, that allow us to basically fall in line to learn. I'm thinking of like the military and, maintaining responsibility and authority and all of this stuff. So it's important. So if we're going through this process and we have to go through this process, it makes me think of a conversation I had yesterday about being an intrapreneur on your way to being an entrepreneur. So while you're in this process and these systems, learning these little things, like, why would we do that? And just make a note, make a reference for yourself where you can comfortably ask questions and understand. And then when you get to a point where I know I'm understanding why I'm doing this, this is in my mind how it would be better. So when you do get the opportunity to be an entrepreneur on your own, you can make those differences. And that's exactly what you've done.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that's all you can really do when you're in a system like that, like for self-preservation, is to just make notes of things, how they're ridiculous. But then you only get to change things if you step out of the system, if you continue to work in the system, which almost all physicians do at this point, and you're really still stuck. I mean, you can have your own practice with a giant building and all sorts of staff and all, but insurance tells you to stand on one foot when you write a note. You're going to be standing on one foot when you write a note. I mean, that sounds silly, right? Who would do that? But I mean, the things they ask are not too far away from being as ridiculous as standing on one foot. If Medicare came out tomorrow and said all physicians need to stand on their left foot while they write notes, I guarantee you in the hospitals, there'd be a compliance officer there checking everybody's, making sure they're standing on one foot and documenting it. And there'd be an extra line in the EMR immediately, right? Because that's the only thing that gets changed in these large systems is when insurance requires it. Then change immediately.
And the reality is, I mean, I'm sure we could shake a lot of people's emotions with this particular conversation. The reality of it is, if the insurance companies do it, they have the money, the lobbyists, and to put rules and power and everything in behind them, it will happen. Like, it will happen. And you will have to do this, you know?
Right. If you want to get paid by them. I mean,
Yeah.
so that's why I removed them from the conversation and work outside. Because, there's so many physicians who try to game that insurance system, and it's been happening forever. And sometimes they'll get small wins here and there, but ultimately they write all of the rules. They're the ones who write the checks. You work for who pays you. And you can try all you want to game it, but they'll always win because you're playing a game where they make the rules to the game. I didn't want to play that game. But that's the kind of situation that most of these docs are in. You have zero control. I mean, you can't even control your overhead because your overhead is mostly in the form of staff. It's all the billers and coders. You don't need all that stuff to practice good medicine. I don't use any of that. I don't need it. Right. I mean, it's just unnecessary. But if you take insurance, it's absolutely necessary, and that requirement goes up year after year. And then your reimbursements go also down year after year. So now you can't control your overhead, or you can't set your prices, and it's a recipe for failure, which is what's been happening.
Track the money, you'll find the power. And that idea of tracking it back through to the insurance companies, that's where the power lies in creating this. And through the years, and I've had this conversation, I think I had it with Arlen as well, too, regarding the SOPE, S-O-P-E, Society of Physician Entrepreneurs. This conversation of it is such a huge, huge machine. And it's been built through as soon as academics began to create these processes and feed these machines, it's so big now. And, you're bumping up against schools, you're bumping up against insurance, these, like you said, these big equity companies. So there's lots of money, lots of power. And if you want to make one change, it has to be massive. So that's why I do like the idea of SOAP, and they're trying to push in on an earlier, just planting seeds as physicians are coming through. Just like what you're saying, Daniel, this is it now, but this doesn't have to be it. So here's what happens when you have an idea. Here's how you can grow that idea. Just first step is realizing that you're going to be stacking these experiences together, and that's going to create opportunity for you to have creativity.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're totally right that it's such a behemoth. I mean, you're talking about the United States is like the wealthiest country in the history of the world right now, right? The wealthiest in the history of the world. And like 20% of GDP is on healthcare. So, I mean, it gives you a sense of what kind of beast this thing is.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the only way I've found to work successfully is to kind of, I mean, look, at its core with medicine, it's like, what do you really need? You need a doctor or provider, and you need a patient.
Mm-hmm.
That's mostly it. That's the core of it. So as long as you can do that, you can practice medicine. You don't need all this other stuff. So what I've done is essentially removed all the other stuff and just focused on the core of it. And it allows me to provide better care, I think, because I'm not forced into a high volume practice. I see less people, I can take longer, and I feel like do a better job. But you're not going to, a lot of people try to fight that beast in its own territory. And like, oh, you're just, you're talking multi-billion-dollar companies, whole dedicated lobbying arms, like you said. Yeah. That's not the turf to fight them on. You have to fight them where they don't exist, I think. And that's like cash pay patients or those with high deductibles or things outside of that system, which is small, but it's there and it's growing.
It's fighting them on this battle, almost where they can't exist, Daniel. It's coming back and becoming an entrepreneur and setting this path for yourself, right? And that's exactly what you're saying about going on a cash-based thing. And I was also reading one of your recent posts on LinkedIn as well, too, where you basically said how to not be happy as a doctor, right? And these things of what not to do. The other things I like about in your writings, too, is like, if I don't have all of this stuff, like if I'm not being forced to stand on one leg to write this stuff, look at all these other things that I can do that I want to do that make me happy and make my patient happy. I get to spend more time with them if I'm not chasing down, filling out form. I get to spend more time with them to educate them, right? So this fighting this battle against this larger entity, that a macro perspective, and it makes both the physician and the and the patient happy.
Yeah, I mean, it's really incredible. I mean, I call my practice easy orthopedics, and not because orthopedics is easy. Sometimes surgeons think, oh, this guy's just tough. It's not what I'm saying. I made it because the process is easy. For instance, I had a patient who I saw the other day, and he has insurance. He has good insurance. According, I don't think that really exists, but he says he has it. And he's like, oh, I need, his wrists were hurting. He's looking for cortisone shots in his wrist. He's like, oh, I got to find a primary care doc because he just moved, and they got to give me a referral, and they got to go to the ortho doc, and that's going to take a while. And they're going to do all this imaging and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, oh, or you could just call me and I'll see you the same day and we'll do it all at once. And so he was thrilled about it. He was just thrilled about that whole experience because we just removed all the obstacles that he normally encounters to care. So, I mean, it's really good for, I think, both parties. And the odd thing is, it's really kind of wild. I have a lot of, I mean, you're not going to hear a physician say this very often. I have a lot of free time. That's what this model does. You're moving instead of a high volume, high overhead. You have low volume, low overhead, but that doesn't. But the profit can be the same or more. So it's like you just turn the treadmill down and end up having lots of free time. I mean, when you don't have to deal with any of the things that you hate dealing with in the system, it opens up the world of time to you. So, I was used to not having any. So going from that grind to this, it's been pretty crazy. Actually, it's pretty wild.
So my experience too of going from a big overhead machine, lots of marketing, lots of employees, prospectively speaking for me, and now to where we're broken down, we're streamlined, and I'm happier than I've ever been. And it's just because we're simple, we're focused, we're not trying to create this. Because why do I have to work so hard and spend so much money to make that little bit of money when I can spend a tenth of it and take me a tenth of the time and make just as much money?
Yeah, it's the same thing. I mean, I don't think people think about it like that, but it's really the truth of it. I mean, that's what you get when you become an entrepreneur and you're in an unconstrained system.
Yep.
The inputs don't always match the output. So you can put in a little bit of effort and get a lot of output. Conversely, you could put in a lot of effort and get negative, which, you can't really get in the system. So, I mean, I think as entrepreneurs, we accept that sort of risk and that state of being. And that allows us also to have these situations where we can essentially work less and make more, which sounds like it can't exist. I mean, it can't exist in the system. It can only exist in these unconstrained sort of businesses that we have.
Yeah. And the one thought that pops into my mind on this bigger macro perspective is the money for R&D, the money that comes from bigger places that smaller entities couldn't do. It doesn't mean it can't happen. It has to be, I guess, if you're looking at it as an entrepreneur, as an employee, or an intrapreneur as an employee, you're looking at what I've heard called the $0 investor. So I'm just doing it a little differently. So if we could reduce some of the costs where it was wasteful, bureaucratic pieces of certain steps, maybe that this type of research development creation can happen even on these smaller levels of entrepreneurs.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a ton of YouTube channels where you can see basically people inventing crazy things that would cost a company like millions of dollars, and they do it in their backyard and get a prototype for like next to nothing. So, yeah. I mean, I think there's an advantage to being lean and just being, a small group or just yourself. You can really move very, very quickly.
And now where you're at, we just want to touch on this just a little bit. It feels like you're happy in this product. And I will say, I say this a lot, that there are going to be those people around you that say it's not going to work. And like you said, even when it's working, you still have those naysayers. And I heard Alex Hormozi say it. They are going to be there. They're going to tell you it's not going to work. And they're going to tell you you suck. They're going to tell you all these things. And they're going to be right every single time until they're not. And when they're not, then that's when it sets you apart from everything else. So being able to overcome those people on the journey, I always encourage everybody to keep pushing, keep digging ditches, because there are going to be those people that are going to be out there telling you that you can't do this. You can't do this type of practice, right? You can't do this type of form, or it just doesn't work, right? they're going to be out there and keep pushing through them.
Yeah, I get those all the time. I mean, the best thing to do in the beginning when you have a creative idea that's more fragile is really just to not talk to them.
Mm-hmm.
You want to ask people for advice, and then they'll just, I mean, I remember when it was the beginning of my practice, I think it was SCORE. I don't know if you have that there. It's like, to help you kind of start business. I think it used to stand for Senior Corps of Retired Executives. I don't know if it stands for that anymore. Anyways, this guy, I talked to him. We're sitting down. I'm in my suit. You know what I mean? It was back in the suit days when I used to roll around in a suit.
Yeah.
So I didn't know. And, I get this email later telling me that, like, I think your idea is going to fail.
Oh, wow.
Pretty much, in a nicer way. I mean, he was wrong. He didn't know what he was talking about. So you have to be careful because that stuff can really drag you down.
Yeah.
Otherwise, if you really think it's going to work, talk to someone who's going to support you. Don't talk to some guy who's just been working in the same business for working for someone his whole life and has never taken a risk ever. That person's not going to help you. They're just going to tell you it's not going to work because they live a very risk averse life, at least in an entrepreneurial sense.
Yep. Yeah. And finding a mentor is I think one of the best ways to catapult you in whatever it is you're doing. And when you reach to find that mentor, you want to find somebody that's doing what you want to do already. So somebody in your situation, Daniel, somebody who is already taking this risk of producing or creating this out of the box kind of idea where you don't have a facility, right? And you're not taking insurance. So who is somebody that I could reach out to that's doing something similar to that? It doesn't have to be in orthopedics. Doesn't have to be any exact option that you've got going on, but somebody that's had a similar situation, and then it's more than likely they'll be positive, right? They'll be lifting you up and showing you, hey, do this, hey, don't do this.
Yeah, I mean, that's sort of what happened with me with one of my medical school colleague who essentially did that. He was 4 years ahead of me, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And he was positive. He's like, I think you can be successful. Here's some things, do this, don't do that. And, we had a couple conversations. And then now I have another med school colleague who's just starting the process now. So he just quit his job, which I think is mm-hmm. wonderful. And so it's like we're all spaced apart, But yeah, we certainly, I think that's a really great idea is to find someone who's already doing it because they're going to tell you good, useful information, not just that, no, it'll never work or that won't work.
And when you're expanding your associations, don't get stuck in a particular field. Like just because somebody doesn't practice medicine doesn't mean that they can't help you create this idea, because when it comes down to its people, process, product, Marcus Lemonis has said this and it's stuck in my head for so long, people, process, product. You get those three simple things down. It doesn't matter if it's medicine, you could be making candy. It doesn't matter. When you lay those three things together, somebody's going to have experience in creating this out of the box idea, creating the systems. How do I run this? What can I do this? So when you're expanding your associations, looking for these mentors already doing what you're trying to do, they don't have to necessarily be this picture of who you think they're going to be, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, there's a certain skill of just business in general. So, I mean, if you find the right person, they'll certainly be able to help you and, tweak what you're doing. But, like I said, you have to be careful if you find the wrong person. They're just going to tell you that it's never going to work and just go back and be a cog, which, for someone like you or me is not going to work.
Or somebody who thinks they know what they're doing. That I always tell everybody, at a certain point, I stopped when I go to Lowe's, like a home improvement store. I stopped asking because you get somebody who's in there who thinks they know something, and it may cost me a day, 2 days worth of backsliding to get back to where I was. Where if they would have just said, "Hey, man, I don't know. This is what I would try," it would have been a little different. But it's so dangerous, Daniel, when you do listen to somebody who thinks they know something.
Yeah, that can be hard, right? I mean, it depends. You're in Lowe's, that person's in a position of authority of sorts, right? They work in the, Lowe's all day. And thankfully, I don't think I've encountered someone who really steered me wrong.
Right.
It wasn't too many people to pilot off of for what I was doing. So it was mostly just my two good friends, trial and error.
Yeah.
Who, help you out.
Well said.
As long as you don't sink yourself, right? Just fail forward.
Yeah.
It's kind of been what I've been doing. But yeah. You certainly get that. I've had that experience as well. I mean, I'm not doing the same construction projects you are, but
Yeah. And in this path too, Daniel, where like a mobile solution for you, you don't have this brick and mortar. And one thing that there is massive benefit in practicing medicine is when you own the real estate that you're practicing in.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
So we've talked about this just a little bit too, that you have an interest in getting into commercial real estate. Tell me what attracts you, and just preface that you don't own any commercial right now, and you're just starting this process of learning, thinking, finding. What attracts you about commercial real estate?
Oh man, I mean, if you just look at like leases and and I'm sure a lot of listeners are much, much more experienced in real estate than I am. I just own my own house just for transparency's sake. Mm-hmm. But, you're paying for the build out, you're paying the lease, you're paying the insurance, you're paying the property taxes, you're paying you're paying everything. I don't want to invest a bunch of money building something out that I don't own. Mm-hmm. I'd rather be the one who owned the building, so that to me, just seems like the right way to go. So I think right now I'm just kind of looking on LoopNet, getting an idea of what things cost, mm-hmm. what exactly I'm looking for. But to me, at least the first building would be owner operator. It'd be nice to have some space in there to rent out as well.
Yeah.
But I think that just is, also you build a business with a lease and, 5 years comes up and that lease comes up for renewal and then gets jacked up. You kind of have a problem.
Yeah.
They can do that to you, and you've established your business there. So I just think for stability purposes, that's something I've always wanted to do. I don't need to do it being mobile right now, but it's certainly on the list of things that I'm going to work toward.
Yeah. So when you said LoopNet, just want to make sure everybody knows that's kind of like the MLS for commercial. It's like the Zillow for commercial properties, where you can go on and look at commercial properties. And the lease that you were talking about, I hear triple net lease, where the tenant is taking care of insurance, taxes, utilities, all above. So the property owner just holds the property. And those are the most attractive commercial leases out there. One thing that I like, Daniel, I've got a couple of these are mixed use commercial. For me, they're fun. They diversify still too. So it's not straight strip mall kind of, I can do my practice in here and then I can rent out to a nail salon or, whatever here, where the mixed use commercial will have residential, with I can't think of the word for office or storefront kind of retail. So you could have, that's the word, residential and retail as well too. Some of those ones that we do that with, Daniel, we've got Airbnbs in the residential, and then the retail is where I started my office, and it's where I came out of the basement doing real estate into a place where I acquired a mixed use commercial building. It had a tenant in there already. And like you're saying, this tenant was a dog groomer. The space was already built out as very unique for that person. For that person to go somewhere else, it would be a massive cost. So they've continued to pay and stay this whole time, really been the anchor tenant, and it creates a scenario where I was coming out of my basement as a real estate investor. I found an office where I'm getting paid to be in that office, right? Because all the other rents are paying the lease, or not even the lease, they're paying the mortgage for the property.
Yeah, that's the space that I want to be in. And I just don't think I'd much rather be on that side of things than the other side, to where I'm paying for the lease,
Yep.
And I guess I have the luxury if I can just kind of be mobile and bounce around until I can kind of get to the point where I want to do it. But yeah, I wouldn't, I don't understand why you'd want to be on the other side of it,
Yeah. And on top of that, there's so many more benefits. So I think I would encourage you to stay on that path. I am by far the most experienced investor out there. And I tell you what, my main goal is if you saw me in Lowe's and I didn't know the answer to your question, I'm going to tell you, hey man, I don't know that. Here's what I've tried before. This has worked. This didn't work for me. I feel I'm that guy in real estate. And if you take that direction moving forward, say, hey, this is what I'm looking for, and start reaching out to people who have already done this, similar to what you're doing, I think that can help you get there faster and on that path, Daniel, where you're happy like that guy in Florida.
Yeah. I'm certainly at the beginning of that educational process. So educate before I do anything. I got to educate myself before I do anything.
Yeah. And then when the time comes, avoid analysis paralysis. If you've done the research, you've got the resources, you've got the team. When it's time to pull the trigger, you got to pull the trigger. You got to take action,
Yeah. Oh yeah. I hear you on that.
Yeah. So many benefits of real estate, and in this path that you're on. Again, I just want to thank you for your transparency and being able to talk about things like this, because there's so many listeners out there that are feeling that same way, struggling, and maybe who can't speak up, right? So I just want to thank you for speaking out and having that opinion, holding it tight, and keeping your head down and keep rocking, man. I appreciate it, Daniel.
Yeah, well, Brett, thanks for having me on, giving me a platform. I think these things are important and, they need to be said.
Yeah. Awesome. And before we go, you wrote a book too. I didn't, so you got into medical school, huh? Now what?
Oh yeah, I did. I don't even think about it too much anymore. I figured there wasn't a good guidebook to medical school, so I wrote one and published it during residency, maybe in 2015. I think it sold maybe like 1,500 copies or so over the years. So,
nice.
Yeah, that is something that I did.
Very interesting. Very interesting. Last thing that I want to ask you today, Daniel, is if you could go back to Daniel right around that time, like maybe going into residency or maybe just going into residency, what's something that you would tell yourself?
Oh my gosh. I think that I would say that sort of a message of embracing the chaos of life, in the sense that the path to become a physician is so linear, and life is just not linear at all. So to kind of be open to the non-linearities that everybody in that, will no doubt encounter.
Embrace the chaos. Yes, that's awesome. My wife has a coffee cup that she's the CCC of our companies, right? Chief Chaos Coordinator. She keeps it all together. As a front runner, like visionary, I just go out and stir stuff up and make tornadoes. And then, like you're saying, embracing that chaos and finding order in it is really important. And that's a great note to end on too, because we set these goals, Daniel, and we say, okay, in 5 years, I'm going to have a commercial place. I'm going to have a nice anchor tenant. The important part is exactly like you're saying, is embracing the chaos to get to that point, and not being solely fixed on that goal. It's the journey that is what it's all about. And it's who we become on this journey that's really important. So embracing the chaos is great advice. Man, thanks for your time. I really appreciate it. I've had a great time. I hope the listeners have enjoyed the opinions and the conversation and this drop of knowledge, right?
Yeah, well, I appreciate it again, Brett. Thanks for having me on. It's always nice to kind of be able to speak my opinions and, have people that are, I guess they're interested in hearing them. So here we are.
Like-minded. That's right. Oh, all right. Well, it's kind of like in the medical process now, where in the education and residency and all that, is everybody can listen out there, but they can't say anything to us. So they just have to listen to our opinions at this point. They have to fill the form and lift their leg while they fill the form, because it's a podcast. But if you guys are out there, if you want to reach out and connect with Daniel, you can find him on LinkedIn is the best spot. And it is Easy Orthopedics. Very easy, just like the process, right? At linkedin.com. And you can see / Easy Orthopedics. You'll find Daniel Paull, MD, on there. You can reach out to him. I suggest you go there. He does a lot of posting. I love reading it. You can track him down on there. And thank you for your time today, giving us a listen. We really appreciate it. If you get the chance, if you're listening on Apple or on Spotify, please take a minute and review. Drop us a 5-star review, some comments in there as well, too. If you have any suggestions on future shows or guests or questions, feel free to email us, info@physicianwealthsystems.com. And until next time, thank you very much. We'll see you soon.